Hi, everyone. It's Rachel Lauren, and it's time for some money therapy. Today's guest is Tawnya Schultz, better known as the Money Life Coach. She is a financial mindset whiz, has over 240,000 followers on TikTok, and helps you break out of the paycheck to paycheck cycle. Being the COO and co founder of Debbie, a rewards app for debt payoff, I'm a strong believer that being good with money is about 80% what you do and around 20% what you know. If you take the analogy of food, studies have actually shown that putting calorie counts on menus has almost no impact on whether people will make the healthy decision. The exact same thing applies to money, and I know Tawnya knows a lot about that. Now, Tawnya, I know you were inspired to build your business because of your own personal experience, and that's why we're here. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to talk to you today.
So let's just jump right in. We're going to get to the hard questions. Format here is we're really going to run through what that personal experience was like, how you got through it, and what you learned along the way. So, just to kick us off, where did you grow up? How did you grow up? What was your family life like? And what was their relationship with money?
Yeah. So I grew up in Southern California. My parents were together, I had a sister. My parents were together up until I was 12, 13 is when the separation began. But as a young kid, we had a stable household. We definitely lived paycheck to paycheck. There was money fights, there was stress about money. That was constant in my life. And one of my first money memories was like my dad coming home with a new car and he hadn't talked to my mom, hadn't had a conversation with my mom about it. So I had a lot of negative feelings around money or anxiety around money early on because of that. All the things you look back and reflect on later when you're an adult or older. But when the divorce happened was when things really got apparent, like how much of a struggle money was. Like money is a struggle, money is hard to make. So a lot of this stuff with just this fights around money and things like that started coming up as a kid. And that really impacted me living paycheck to paycheck well into my early 30s until I was finally like feeling trapped and stuck in a situation because of it and ready to turn my life around. Yeah.
And how do you think that impacted you in terms of your mindset? What do you think that did to you?
Um, I mean, now I definitely know it kept me in a cycle of living in paycheck to paycheck. And like that was normal to me because I grew up struggling and the struggle was normal, which sounds crazy, but it's like we are a creature of our habits and the beliefs and the things that we learn as children, especially. I definitely think it impacted me and how I was like good with money on paper, right? Like I was like paying my bills on time and I had a good credit score. But I didn't really know how to manage my money. I didn't know a lot about investing. And there was just tools and resources that I didn't have growing up because I was always in this anxiety and fear around money with that money mindset piece of not knowing how to like break out of that cycle in my mind. So I definitely feel like it impacted me like a lot, and it's been a
Yeah.
lot to like try to reverse those that psychology around money. That's something a lot of people don't think about. They just think like you said, that behavior piece around money is super important. So like, how do I change my behavior and my
Yeah.
habits around money? That was something I started getting a lot of like asking
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. And I think like a lot of people who grow up paycheck to paycheck or are paycheck to paycheck, you're often kind of foisted into this world of
Mhm.
credit, right? It's an area that a lot of people have to go to because they don't necessarily have the money to pay for their basic expenses. What was your first experience with the credit system?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the late 90s and early 2000s, when I was kind of like getting out of high school and going into college, credit was like you get a credit card for emergencies. You know what I mean? Like credit cards were becoming more popular, I would say, and it was easier to get. So it's like, oh, you need a credit card right away. And if you have a credit card, that means you're responsible with money. That was like that thing that we were taught and what we learned. But it was weird because, like, deep down, I mean, even going into college, I didn't get a lot of help with college, and I knew I wasn't going to have a lot of help. So I was super conscious of like where I went to school, how much I was spending. I didn't want to take on a lot of debt. So that was always in the back of my mind of like I didn't like to be in debt. I didn't like the feeling of paying somebody else or like making all these payments. So I definitely was trying to like I had that in the back of my mind as like I knew something I didn't like. So I was trying to minimize that, but it was definitely credit's normal. Like taking on credit, going into debt, whether it's like buying a car and buying things now I look back on things I couldn't afford was normal, of how I grew up.
And so, did you feel like the things that you bought were things that were all necessities, or were there purchases in there that, sort of looking back, were definitely not things that you
Definitely
needed?
not. Um, No, a lot of things I rationalized my spending or paying it back later, and just getting in that feeling of, once I started getting in the habit of using my credit cards and it becoming too easy to use that instead of my debit card, I noticed myself, like, I know it's like scarcity mindset and a fear around money now, but I was like, oh, I want to keep the money that's in my checking account, so I'm going to put it on my credit card instead. And I would buy things extra at Target that I didn't need because I was there, and I was like, I'll pay it back later. Like, I definitely started to have that mentality more and more. And going on trips I didn't have the money for, buying a lot of crap basically now, like a lot of stuff. Not necessarily, trips and experiences are one thing, but like definitely I felt anxiety and guilt and shame around money a lot, even when I was using the credit card, because I was in a cycle of using it.
And so when you told yourself that you were going to pay it back later, what was the idea? Like where did you think you were going to get that money, or what were you going to do? What was the plan?
Yeah, it was like when I got paid, I'm going to pay off a chunk of this debt. Or I was also freelancing. So I'd be like, oh, when I get this bigger payment, whatever it is, then I'll pay it back later. I was in the whole payment mentality that I call a lot of people out on, thinking like, oh, I can make the payment, so I'll figure it out.
And savings were not in anywhere part of this equation.
No. No, like a little bit here and there, like I tried to save, but I wasn't really in the habit of saving. And I tried to start to learn about investing and Roth IRA and things like that, but I didn't really know what I was doing. So I was just like trying to throw spaghetti, like trying to figure it out, but not, didn't have clear goals around money, which I think is super important. I didn't have clear financial goals, and I didn't have a clear system or support in place for me to reach the goals.
Yeah. It's really hard to decide to save if you have absolutely no idea what it's for, right? Like my husband and I, we're trying to save every month, and some months it's harder than others. And I think sometimes for a long time it was because we weren't necessarily aligned on what it was that we wanted that money for. So if
Hmm.
you're just like in this mindset of just, oh, I'm just gonna like throw money on a pile that's like accumulating somewhere over there, and I have no idea what I'm gonna do with it, and I'm not spending it, it's just there. Fine. If it's for an emergency fund, like, okay, I need that money in case of a rainy day, that's a very clear goal and idea, and everyone should have an emergency fund. But let's
Yeah.
say even, beyond that, as you start thinking about you want to buy a home, or you want to buy a car, or you want to save up for your kids, you want to go on vacation, like having an idea of what exactly that money is going towards makes it a lot easier to save that money.
1,000,000%. Yeah, that's one of the number one things I see as a coach, a financial coach now, is like people have very generic goals, or they have them in their head, but they don't really have them. Yeah, it's like, I want to save money, I want to pay off debt, but they don't have a reason why, and they don't have a clear number. Like, what is the number, and how are they reverse engineering that goal to get there to where they want to go? And so, when I get on calls with people and they say, I want to save money, I'm like, for what? What are you saving? Well, I don't know. I just need to save. And I'm like, that's not, you're not, but we hear these things in society and, online and stuff. And we're like, oh, we need to save, we need to invest. And we don't think about the why or the reason why, or have those clear goals. And I really believe in like focusing on only a couple goals at a time, because like then it gets overwhelming. Because like what I was trying to do for so long too was pay off multiple debts at a time, save some money, invest some money, go on this trip. Like I literally had like 10 competing goals. And we all know how crazy it is to like multitask and try to do that many things at once. You don't have enough energy, or focus on one thing. So yeah, only having a couple goals and then really getting clear on what those goals are and how you're going to reach them is like crucial.
Yeah, I think there's a stat out there that only 9% of people actually reach their New Year's resolution goal. And yeah, only 9%. And the reasons behind that we found was that is that they don't have a why. They don't have a reason. So let's say they want to lose weight. It's not, because for health reasons, they just feel like it's something I need to start doing. The second is that the goal is too big. So people will say, oh, I'm going to start working out, 5 times a week. It
Yeah.
normally takes anywhere from 2 to 3 months to actually build a habit. So good on you if you're going from 0 to 5 times a week for 2 months straight and then maintaining that. But most people cannot do that. So that's often why people end up failing. I can see in terms of savings, when we're not setting up the expectations of what we want to do, and starting small and kind of doing those baby steps.
Yeah. I know. It's that like restrictiveness that we put on ourselves and the pressure of like going to the extremes. So it's like, how can you find a middle ground? Chunking down the size of the goal, like even if it's like this week or whatever, I'm going to cook at home 3 times this week. It can be that small, but that has 10 other steps to it, right? You got to prep the meals, you got to have a meal plan, like you have to have some planning in place. It all comes down to planning and being proactive versus reactive with your money, just like it does proactive. Like when we're from a reactive place, we make impulse decisions instead of planning and preparing what we're going to make that week or making a shopping list. Every time I go to the grocery store without a shopping list, I have instant anxiety. Like I go in the store, I'm like, what do I need? What do I get? And I grab random stuff. Then I come home and I'm like, what do I make? Like, what do I do? So just that little bit of planning, like people hate on planning and like a budget and stuff like that, but just that little bit of sometimes planning and preparing sets us up for more success.
And so, when you were going through this phase, what was that trigger point for you that said, I need to fix this issue?
I think it was a stacking of like multiple things, but really kind of the tipping point or the low point for me was I think something happens when you're in your early 30s. I've talked to a lot of women, especially in the early 30s. You're out of college, you have a career, you're making good money, but you still don't know how to manage your money and you don't have that sense of control around your money and you want to be better. So that kind of happened at the same time. I was in between kind of careers. Like I had an initial career that I was transitioning out of, and in this kind of like quarter life crisis or something, in a way, like what am I doing with my life, my career? And then I ended up moving in with my boyfriend at a default. Like we just met a few months before, and I moved in with him because he's like, oh, you're in between living situations, like you can stay here, And I was like, great, I'll save money. Like this is gonna help me pay rent. And did this by default because I didn't have any savings or a plan. And then I instantly felt like reliant on him for money and anxious that I was like living with this person who I didn't really know. And now I have all this debt and I don't have any savings. And I was like, what am I doing? I just like had a panic basically of like, I have a bunch of debt. I don't want to feel like this anymore. Um, so yeah, that happened. And that's when I was like, I need to start educating myself or trying to empower myself around my personal finances and like start to take action to fix this situation that I'm in. So I'm not in this situation.
And how bad was it at its peak?
I mean, I was pretty depressed for a little, for a while. I was pretty depressed. Like I actually started making pretty good money. Like I was able to build up another career in marketing and copywriting. So I had the skills. So I kind of told myself, as much as I don't want a full-time job, I want to do freelance. I'm going to do this temporarily in order to get myself out of this situation. So I was able to like be resourceful and kind of work through it. But there was definitely times when I felt trapped, when I felt stuck, and I felt like, yeah, I just felt like there wasn't a way out.
Yeah. How much debt was there? Just for like people to have some context.
Yeah, yeah. I'd say when I started the official debt-free journey, I had almost $30,000 in debt, but probably at the highest, the most debt I had was like 50 or 60,000 with like student loans and credit cards and car loans and things like that. But I had started to pay some off. I got out of credit card debt and then I really only had my car loan and I only had a little bit on a student loan. So yeah, I had like paid some of it off. I was kind of spinning my wheels and feeling on that like roller coaster still, like
Yeah.
not able to get off.
Yeah, and that's often what we see. We see anywhere from like 18 to 30,000 or 15 to 30,000 that people have hooked up in their accounts. So, and that's between every kind of debt, right? Credit cards, student loans, auto loans, lots of auto loans. People who get one car, finance it, and then get another one and sort of, stack financing on top of financing on top of financing with every new car. It's crazy how bad it can get. But it's good that you had that moment of sort of, it's unfortunate, right? And you think about what it takes for someone to make a change. Often when you think about when people go to therapy, it's usually when they've hit a sort of like, I don't want to say rock bottom, that sounds really bad, but it's often when they hit a really low point or some episode that happens that forces them into that situation to seek help.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate that a lot of times people won't necessarily make a change or won't feel like they need to make a change unless they're in a really really bad place. But that's where we're at, and I think that's really that there needs to be that catalyst, that propulsion to get you to want to change.
I feel like yeah, it's a good thing. I'm glad it wasn't any worse or wasn't a dangerous situation or something like that. Like, you know, and I had other support. Like I said, like I did. It's like we always feel kind of trapped and stuck more than we actually are. So it's like, how can I reach out and get support or start to educate myself to empower myself? And personal development was something I like to do anyway. So I was like, okay, I'm going to start reading personal finance books and like listen to podcasts and start trying to like start getting some of those positive reinforcements and start hearing other people's stories on like how they did it and how they were figuring it out. Cause I was like, I felt like, what am I doing wrong? This can't be this hard. Why am I feeling this way? And like, what am I doing wrong?
And what did you end up reading? Who did you find that you felt helped you at the beginning?
There was one author named Kate Northrup. So she wrote Money, a Love Story. It's all about our beliefs around money and our habits. That was really good. And that really impacted me. There was also You Are a Badass at Making Money, Jen Sincero's You Are a Badass series that I really liked. And then I did listen to Dave Ramsey a lot and the Ramsey Show daily because it's on like, it was new episodes every day. And I felt like this is so simple, like this is so basic, and I can follow the baby steps and the principles. But also, what really impacted me was hearing other people's stories of getting out of debt. That's what, the debt free screams that they do on the show. That was one of the coolest things to me because I was like, not to sound, you know, it's like you heard people that are like in way worse situations. You're like, oh my God, like these people are way worse than me and they figured this out. Like, so it kind of gave you hope. It gave me hope. And I just kind of got addicted to like listening to people's stories and like how they did it and inspired and motivated through that. Really, I was like, oh my gosh, this is exciting. Like these people have done it. And that's when I started making those goals and that plan to get out of debt. Like, what does this look like if I pay off my debt in 2 years, 1 year? I didn't want it to take forever. So I was like, could I pay this off in a year? What does that look like? How much money do I need to pay towards my debt? So I started being able to break it down a lot more and then see the light at the end of the tunnel, like see a path. Yeah.
And I think that was also the impetus for us to start this podcast or this interview series, was that we found all of these creators and financial gurus like Dave Ramsey, who would talk about people's stories and show how they did it. And I think his approach, when it comes to creating that catalyst again, showing people what's wrong and kind of putting it in their face and showing them that goal at the end is really great. But it's the steps along the way. It's almost like, the program itself is called baby steps, but, and I don't know, you tell me a little bit of your thoughts, but I've always found that this mindset of just eat beans and rice and make a 180 in your life, cut out all your spending, like you said, felt really restrictive. And that's always how his message came across to me. But maybe I'm wrong, maybe I am misrepresenting a little bit.
No, I mean, it definitely does. I feel like mostly the audience that he talks to, the income is generally lower too, and they're just over. A lot of people are just way overspending and have a ton of debt. Sometimes people need that harsh reality, I guess, that like kind of push and that like, what are you doing? Like, look in the mirror. You know what I mean? Kind of like push them a little bit harder. And I think that's just what some people need. Like my approach has now been like, you can budget and get out of debt while still having a life. Your budget and your this doesn't have to be restrictive, but if you're not budgeting, you're just ignoring your finances and you're not going to get anywhere. So like let's figure out what's important to you and figure out a way to budget that in, but also like how are you going to get out of debt? Cuz like you have, half your income for example is going towards debt. You're working half the month to pay minimum. You're burning money. Like I try to like help people get a little bit clearer picture on their reality and being like what can we do to up your income or being more resourceful without being like, don't live on nothing. Some people have to have that extreme. I always tell people to, could you temporarily, for a month or two, cut everything way back? Just out, still people are going to have some like going out or things in there, but like, can you cut like as much as stuff as possible temporarily to start to get some traction? And then you can start to add some things back in, but everybody, it doesn't have to be so extreme. You know what I mean? And there's
Yeah. It's almost like I guess it's case by case, right? It depends how bad the situation is. Like, for example, you think about an elimination diet, right? A lot of people now are having autoimmune issues, and myself included, went to the doctor and they were like, yeah, you probably shouldn't be eating gluten, soy, and dairy. And I'm like, okay, great. So I'm going to take my, behavioral change steps, my advice that I see every day. And I'll take, I'll start slowly. I'll maybe eat gluten once a week. I'll maybe eat soy once a week, dairy sparingly. And then I go back to the doctor and she's like, no, you need to cut this out completely because every time you eat it, your body is just not processing it and restarting the process all over again. So it's the kind of situation where you have to just cut it out for 6 months, and then you can start to reintroduce at the point where your body can actually handle it and is not just going to like overreact. And I think again, depending on the situation, how bad it is, and really like how sensitive people are, I think is whether or not they're able to kind of do that, the elimination diet version of their budget.
Yeah, like you said, how bad they want it, what their goals are. If it is buying a house or being able to invest more or retiring early, whatever it is, or just being able to like not stress about money, like removing that stress around spending so much of your time paying off debt. You know what I mean? And all your money that's coming in going right back out. That's pretty basic and simple. Like most of us work 40 hours a week. A lot of people have nothing to show for it and they don't want to spend 5 to 10 minutes to look at their money every week or every month. So I say, like, you spend 40 hours a week to make money, but you don't spend 5 to 10 minutes a week to look at your money. That seems kind of like backwards when you think about it. So it are these like small mindset shifts that you can start to have. You can make getting out of debt and saving money and investing money, you can make it fun and like almost like a game for yourself. And that's what I think is good about making it like those small wins along the way and like making
Yeah.
it fun.
The positive reinforcement, the treats, getting treats.
Yeah.
We're doing the right
That
thing.
definitely gets you excited to pay to continue and to keep going. So finding anything you can do like that is really important.
And talking about habit change, what were the hardest changes that you had to make when you really started your debt freedom process?
Stopping using credit cards. I say I was addicted to using credit cards. It was like cigarettes to me. It was like a crutch that was keeping me broke. And I had to like kind of face that and be like, is this helping me get to my goals or hurting me? And it was hurting me because I was like, I had that scarcity and that fear around using that anxiety and guilt and shame that was coming up constantly when I'd use my credit cards because I was like going into more debt and didn't have a plan with my money. So I'd say like that was really hard initially. It's even now hard. Like I still have one personal credit card, but like even spending on it will still give me anxiety because I'm like, I've flipped that habit, like flipped my habit now. Like obviously I don't buy anything unless I like have the money for it or a plan for it. But yeah, that was probably one of the hardest things. And just starting to say no to things that I used to just be like, oh yeah, I'll go here, I'll do this, I'll buy this, like really assessing why am I saying yes to everything and I'm nothing to show for it, you know?
And are you still full abstinence, no credit cards, or is it the kind of thing where you feel like you were able to reintroduce it later on?
Yeah, I always kept one, just my longest standing card for like my credit mostly. But I was pretty good. Like I didn't use it at all for I think like years basically. Like I would use it one time here and there. Now I really only use it if I'm like putting a big purchase on it or going on a trip or something, like something online. But I rarely, almost nothing throughout the month is like I don't just consistently use it. Because managing it with my budget, I feel like it can just easily, like, I can fall into that habit of just buying stuff really easily. And I know myself now a lot better. You know, some people are like, oh, you just pay it off every month and like blah, blah, blah. But I know that I spend more when I use a card and it's too easy. It's too convenient for me to use. So it's like knowing yourself and knowing, you know, if you have one cigarette in the drawer, one piece of candy when you told
Yeah.
yourself, you know what I mean? It's like,
And I love that you say it's about knowing yourself. I think a lot of this process is around just getting to know yourself. I think you say this all the time that personal finance is really personal. Right. So for some people, it is something they can return to. And often, I mean, I have to say, like, I'm a points hacker. I like traveling for free. I probably flew to Miami at least from New York to Miami at least 6 times in the last 3 years for free, which I love. But obviously, yeah, for folks who like yourself, when you say like, you know, if you use a credit card, you're going to go over, and it's about just knowing yourself and
mhm.
knowing what's might end up happening. Abstinence is probably the right option. Do you have an opinion on what they call? Demi Lovato said that she went like California sober. What's your opinion on the California sobriety? She obviously had a really bad drug addiction, and then she went fully sober after I think she got a stroke, and then when she came back, she went, I think, what she called California sober, which was smoking weed like once a week. What's your opinion
Yeah.
on, I guess, the financial version of California sobriety?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's those things that we still like to have and enjoy in our life, right? You know, like I don't beat myself up anymore if I'm like go out to eat and it's a little bit more than I wanted to spend because I have a budget for the month. So we're not perfect. That's what I have to say. Like thinking that we're going to get out of debt or we're going to hit this goal and now everything in our life is going to be perfect is wrong. So giving ourselves grace to be able to have those moments of impulse or indulgence or whatever it is, I think is still really important. As long as you're having a plan every month, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think when we try to put perfectionism or try to be like too perfect and everything, like that's only going to set us up for failure because we can never meet that expectation because we're human.
And speaking of perfection, did you ever have a rebound situation? And how did you go about getting back on the wagon?
I would say I did before I had really clear goals and a plan. I yo-yo dieted basically with my finances and getting out of debt. Probably paid off my debt multiple times. Like I still had my part of my student loan, but
You
like
got to do that scream a few times. Extra screams.
yeah. Yeah, there was a couple times I was like, "Yes, I paid it off," and then I'd just go right back into it. So I did that, 4 or 5 times at least, like paying them off, getting back into debt, paying them off until I would say 2017. So I've been debt free for about 6 years now. Or the end of 2016 was when I was like, I'm committed and I want to like really get on this path. And I think what motivated me too was starting to share my story with other people. And then I was being held accountable by other people because like if I went back into debt, everyone's like, well, wait, you're like this is a it's kind of like that accountability piece of me to talk about it and tell my story to people and start putting myself out there to help people. That made me want to like stick to it.
And how'd you get into coaching? Tell me about where you are now. So you've been 6 years out of this. How did you start this whole?
Yeah, so basically after I got out of debt, I mean, like I said, I was just excited about what I was learning and I was telling people about paying off debt and how I did it and sharing that. And then after I got out of debt, I was always liked coaching and like I said, personal development. And I started getting ads for like financial coaching and helping others. And I was like, you know what, I can teach other people how I did this and be able to give them support and accountability. So I got a financial coach training and then just started building a social media, like started sharing my story basically and like my tips for getting into debt, budgeting, all kinds of personal finance stuff. And now I just feel like it's like something I'm so excited about and I love so much in the last like 3 or 4 years, really building that up and believing in myself. I feel like a lot of stuff when you start a business is like somebody else is doing that. Nobody wants to hear this, that there's enough information out there. But the more I started talking about it and telling people, I was like, the way you tell somebody something, they might hear it differently and it might finally click for them like it did for me. Like it took like I always heard about budgeting. I always heard so many different things about personal finance, but it was like that one person or it takes that one time. So I just was like, this is what I want to do. Been about 4 years now, 3, 4 years that I've been helping people coaching. I was still working a full-time job and then I went full-time to my business last year. So
And what are the biggest pitfalls that you see in your day to day coaching business of things that people are doing right and things that people maybe aren't doing so right?
oh man. I mean, definitely the food category is really hard. That's still one of the hardest categories for me is spending on food and rationalizing our spending on food because we got to eat, right? We're like, oh, we got to eat, we got to just not paying attention. So I think one of the biggest things that I have people do is like look back at the last 3 months and look at their averages for their spending so that they get a better idea. And then seeing a percentage of their budget, like, okay, no more than ideally between 5 and 15% of your income a month should be towards your food budget. But some people you're seeing 20, 25, 30% of their money each month is going towards food. So that's one of the hardest ones for people. And then just getting those clear goals, like we've been talking about, getting really honed in on like, what are these goals and why do I want this? That is one of the number one things that I think like once you get that really clear, then you can start to work on getting there. So yeah, that's definitely the number one. And the accountability, just the accountability and support, getting the support, being able to talk to somebody about their money instead of thinking they need to figure it out by themselves really helps and is able to help people reach their goals faster. Like that accountability and support thing we were talking about earlier. Like people are twice as likely to reach their goals with some support or accountability in place.
Yeah. And what are the biggest trends you see coming up right now in the next year, in terms of your clients and just overall? What are the challenges you see coming up?
Student loans coming back for sure. Student loan payments. Definitely trying to work those back in or figure out a plan. Luckily, a lot of my clients, like we've been working on a lot of their debt payoff so that they can put the payment back in and figure this out. So, yeah, that's one of the number one things because it's like you think it's only a couple $100 a month, but then when you add that in, when everything's gone up and when you haven't been paying that for years, it's really hard to add something back in. And also, buying a home right now is like ridiculous. People wanting to buy a home and really having to step back and be like, do I need to wait? What should I do to buy a home? Making that decision and figuring that out is like obviously crazy right now with the price of houses and the interest rates.
And with respect to student loans, where are the biggest areas that you think people are going to be cutting back to try to make room for that payment? I know there was a stat on CNBC, I think it was on CNBC, where they said that like 70% of Americans who are going to be starting their student loan payments are going to have to choose between that and buying groceries. So I don't know if that's something that you're seeing in your client base.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the being able to budget and look at their money and move some money around. So some of my clients do tend to overspend maybe in entertainment or going out each month or whatever it is. So it's like I said, little things. Can you eat from home 2 more nights a week so that you can put that money, you know? It might not be fun, but temporarily getting that just so you can not have that debt for the rest of your life is key. So looking at your lifestyle and seeing like, do I say no to going to this bachelorette party because that's going to be $3,000, or whatever it is, or like, how can I make different decisions based on what my goals are and stuff like that instead of stressing myself out and giving myself more anxiety about money.
Yeah. And for how many of your clients do you feel that income driven repayment is an option? For those who don't know about income driven repayment, the whole idea is that if you owe a boatload in student loans, instead of making your payment like a regular loan with interest, essentially you make a payment that is a percentage of your discretionary income every month. It's the same amount. And if you continue to make that payment every single month for the next 20 years, the rest of it's paid off. So even if there's still interest left, even if there's still balances left, they forgive the rest of it after 20 years. And for a lot of people who owe a lot of money, whether it's they owe around the same amount as the amount that they make, it could significantly reduce their monthly payment. So is that something you're seeing a lot of your clients thinking about doing? Or
Yeah, a few of them have qualified for that. More of them have a little bit more income than that combined if they're married or are out of that income bracket to because it is more like of a lower income program. But a lot of them have qualified for public service loan forgiveness programs and some other ones that they were providing so that they have some supplemental. Like my one of my clients, she said, I woke up to a letter saying $50,000 of my loans forgiven. So like there's been those people in the public service sector that I work with or certain people who have been able to like get that support or extend repayment. Like sometimes, extending some of the repayments so that they can still work on other goals. Yeah, so a little bit mix of both, but that income driven repayment is good for people who are making that lower income to try to get into.
and do you think it's a good time to buy a home, or should just people wait and hope for the best?
I don't know. I mean, that's hard to say. Like there's one saying that's like there's never a bad time to buy a home, right? Like there's one saying like it's always going to appreciate. I think knowing your financial goals. So I always say unless you don't want to stay if you need at least stay in the home for 5 years minimum, like ideally 10 to be able to overwork the fees and all the interest and try to build some equity into the house. Obviously we saw that kind of opposite in the last few years just because of how houses like everyone has all this equity in their house all of a sudden if they bought a home in 2019 or 2020. But I think really knowing like a house is a long term, just like investing, it should be looked at as a long term investment and a way to make money. So as long as I think if you're ready to buy a home and you know the area you want to live in, you have a stable income, you have an emergency fund in place, obviously, at least a mini emergency fund if you're buying a home, then you should make that commitment because even with the interest rate, eventually, hopefully, it's going to go down some. You could try to refinance that to a lower interest rate. But I think you can get in with you can when you can, as long as the payment makes sense for your budget. Ideally, no more than like 30 to 40% max of your income coming in for the month. But then also knowing that you want to stay there for at least 5 years, I would say, to be able to make that equity and make it worth it.
I have another idea, which is I know that a lot of times people don't necessarily want to buy a home if they don't feel like it's somewhere they really want to live or that it's their dream home and they're holding out hope and sort of waiting for that moment. What are your thoughts on buying a home not to live in, but as an investment property and then continuing to rent? And maybe that property that you buy is not necessarily your dream property, but it's somewhere where you know that you'll be able to get good rental income and cover the mortgage and cover the fees and hold on to it for a good amount of time and maybe even cover a little bit of your own rent. I know I have, maybe not in this market, but I know that, in the past, I have friends who've bought properties and then rented their own, and they made enough profit on their properties to cover at least half of their own rent on top of the actual payment that they had to make on the mortgage and the property that they bought.
Yeah, I'd say do your research as much as possible. Like talk to others who have done that and know what you're getting into so that you know all the positives and negatives. Everyone talks about the positive and looks at making money and passive income. but what does this actually look like to be a landlord?
The fees, fixing everything, it could be a total, yeah, it could be a total hassle. Like I said, the same friend who made enough money that he made a profit bought another property, and that property turned into a crack den. So it could just as easily go south. The first year was great. The second year, then he broke even. Then he wasn't making a profit, he was breaking even.
I have a friend slash client who did the same thing. Like she wasn't living in the property, and then but if you're it's too far away and you can't really keep an eye on it and manage it, you could might have an outside agency, but still they don't it's not their home. They don't manage it, like they're not going to care about it like you do. I think there's nothing wrong, like I think house hacking is a good idea. Like maybe you buy a condo or can still have a roommate and they're helping you pay part of your mortgage or something. Like that's always a good option too, so not being limited, being like, hey, if I got a 2 bedroom or 3 bedroom, what could I rent out a room or whatever it is, like that's always
Right. And then it's easier to manage, right? You live in it, you own it, and you're renting out the other rooms,
I
which is
think
exactly what he did with the first unit, and that's how he was making money.
yeah,
Was he owned a townhouse and he was living in it, and so were his friends. They were paying him to stay there.
yeah,
So it worked out.
that's a I think that's a better idea than like renting out like buying a full another property, but I think it just depends on the situation.
Well, it was awesome having you on, Tanya. It was great talking about your journey and understanding what you went through, both psychologically, financially, in every possible way, how you got through that and got where you are today. So I really, really thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Yeah, I love sharing it, and I hope it helps, even one person start to think differently about money and inspire them that they can do it too.
And how can people find you?
You can find me at just my name, Tanya Schultz, or if you look up the Money Life Coach, you'll also find me on Instagram and TikTok. And then my website is themoneylifecoach.com. So if you head over there, there's a free budget tracker. There's some free resources there. So definitely check that out. If you want to book a call with me too, you can do that too.
Awesome. Thanks, Tanya.